What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Okay, so you guys didn't actually think I was going to leave you on the whole event of like Sabretooth getting adamantium? You didn't think I was going to genuinely just leave you on that? I mean, surely not. Surely you have more faith in me than that. Now, here's a cool thing about that. The other half of that story sucks. It's basically just Sabretooth, Wolverine, and Kitty Pryde teaming up to defeat Hydra, and then like Viper's like, yeah, so I'm officially in charge of Madripoor, this criminal city, and like that's it. Like nothing of any real note happens in the rest of that story. It's the first part that matters for our discussion here. Now, what I want to do here is I want to sidetrack. I want to backtrack all the way to Wolverine Volume 1, issue number 93, all the way to 100. This was like the first part of this Adamantium saga, so to speak. Or I guess really the first part was Fatal Attractions, when he lost his adamantium in the first place. I guess this would be the second part. So the whole idea of why this matters, you know, Wolverine 93 to 100, is that this brings into the fray a character by the name of Genesis, also known as Tyler Dayspring. Now, one of the things that I saw people commenting on is they were like, well, I thought Genesis was the one that gave Wolverine his adamantium back. No, he tried and he failed. So here's the way this whole thing works. Genesis, Tyler Dayspring, is the son of Cable. He's a son of Cable from, you know, the future, more or less. The idea is that Cable exists in two forms. There is Cable, Nathan Summers, and then there's Strife. Strife is basically everything Cable could be. Strife is a monster. Dude, that guy is so beast. That dude, I love Strife as a character. Like he's evil, he's vindictive, but he's crazy powerful. But because of the fact that Strife was raised by the villain Apocalypse, he's like the angsty teenager that never let go of his angst. He's just angry all the time. But he also views Cable as his mortal enemy. And any opportunity that Strife can take to either kill or defeat Cable is an opportunity that he will take. In this instance, Strife had actually kidnapped the son of Cable, Tyler Dayspring, then brainwashed him, turned him to his side, and then Tyler Dayspring ended up becoming a bad guy. Now, the other half of this is that Cable was forced to shoot Tyler due to the fact that, you know, Tyler had basically threatened the life of one of Cable's teammates. It was basically someone close to Cable. Tyler was going to kill him. Cable had to shoot him, and that basically turned Tyler into an enemy of Cable's for almost eternity. So because of that, Tyler would go back in time and try to find ways to defeat his dad. Now, the difference is Marvel never really wrote Tyler like Strife, right? Like Strife was like, if I can kill him, I'm going to kill him. But with Tyler, it was really more of like pot shots, and he would just kind of crop up from time to time. But the idea was that he effectively wanted to use Wolverine for his purposes of trying to take out Cable. The problem with this was that Wolverine didn't have any adamantium. And so in Wolverine issues 93 through 100, what ended up happening is it was this long drawn out thing where it was basically Tyler Dayspring sending his forces after Wolverine and then grabbing Wolverine and bringing him back and trying to bond adamantium to his skeleton. The problem with this is that it failed in disastrous consequences. But the reason why this is like the second phase of the adamantium saga is because the failure of Genesis to try to bond adamantium to Wolverine basically just sent him off into an animalistic state. And that's where feral Wolverine comes from. That's why he looks more like an animal than an actual person. Now, this is a really cool line of stories. It didn't last way too long, but this is when Marvel started running into the comic bust, right? Like it was the idea of comic sales are just plummeting. We basically have to find a way to get people to buy them again. And so this story would basically came to a screeching halt. And what Marvel ended up doing was setting things back to rights almost immediately. Now, the other half of this is that this leads directly into a story called The 12. The 12 was a story that was written in 2000 by Chris Claremont, I think it was. It was really a crossover. So it was like Chris Claremont and it was Alan Davis and it was Terry Kavanagh and Eric Larson and all these different guys who were writing it. But the idea was that Marvel grabbed the villain Apocalypse and said, okay, Apocalypse is trying to grab godly power. He's trying to become God. And the way in which he can do this is to grab a handful of mutants known as the 12. Now, this came out of a character that was named Destiny. I believe her name was Destiny. It was Destiny's diaries. And it was the idea that Destiny could see the future and people would grab her diaries, or at least it was an attempt to seek out her diaries to, one, acquire the future, and two, because her diaries had key information about characters who were of significant or who were of, you know, particular import, different things like that. The story of the 12 was Apocalypse grabbing the shape-shifting race, the Skrulls, and then using them as a means to basically dupe X-Men, different things like that. But he sought out Magneto, Polaris, Storm, Sunfire, Iceman, Cyclops, and Phoenix, I think, and then Cable, Bishop. I want to say Mikhail Rasputin Rasputin and Professor X. But the idea was to basically grab all those 12 mutants who essentially represented like the fundamental forces of the universe, more or less, and then channel those energies directly into himself. And it was really cool because what this would do is it would basically give Apocalypse an insane amount of power. It would basically make him a divine being. For those of you guys who remember X-Men the Animated Series, there was an episode called Beyond Good and Evil, or I think it was a 4-part episode called Beyond Good and Evil. That's based on the 12. The reason why this matters is because one of the things that Apocalypse did is he basically had one of the scrolls shapeshift themselves into being Wolverine. In the background, while the X-Men believed that Wolverine was actually on their team, the real Wolverine had been taken by Apocalypse alongside Sabretooth. And what Apocalypse did is he basically said, my Horseman Death, Warren Worthington, has essentially left, like he's bailed out. And what I need to do is create a new Horseman Death. And so kidnapping Sabretooth and kidnapping Wolverine, what this did is it allowed Marvel to come back and say, now we're going to give Wolverine his adamantium back. And so what Apocalypse did is he said, whichever one of you survives will become my Horseman Death. The caveat is that if Sabretooth survives, he'll just become the Horseman. If Wolverine survives, then Wolverine will not only become the Horseman Death, he will also be given Sabretooth's adamantium. And that's what this did. This was covered in, I believe, Wolverine issues 142 through 145, and maybe even all the way up to issues 147. But it was basically this idea that like Wolverine and Sabretooth were forced to fight one another. Now, the funny thing about this is that this is interspersed basically with a fight with the Incredible Hulk. And it's kind of cool because at the time, we didn't even know who this guy was. We didn't even know who this horseman was. It was just a person who shows up with a samurai sword with this, crazy looking mask, and then just immediately attacks the Incredible Hulk. Now, this changes everything in terms of the Wolverine versus Hulk battles. And the reason for this is because of the fact that while this conflict between Sabretooth and Wolverine is interspersed at the same time that Wolverine is fighting the Incredible Hulk, what we end up having is the battles between the two turned on their head. Historically speaking, and really the debut of Wolverine came with a battle against the Incredible Hulk. The Incredible Hulk issues 180 and 181, but the battles between the two were always pretty significant because it was just regular Wolverine. This gives us Wolverine with modifications facing off against the Incredible Hulk. Now, kind of jumping back and forth in between these things, the battle between Wolverine and Sabretooth is also pretty significant. And the reason for this is not necessarily because of the fact that Wolverine wants his adamantium back. I mean, he does, but he's also learned to cope with bone claws. The issue with this is that Sabretooth, this being classic Sabretooth, is more like a force of nature. I mean, Sabretooth back during like the 80s, 90s, and even going into the 2000s, this guy was insane. He was absolutely nuts. That's why I say there are not very many street level characters that could face off against Sabretooth and succeed. But for Wolverine, knowing that Sabretooth is as hardcore as he is, and knowing that Sabretooth is as violent as he is, it will not necessarily be about Sabretooth being the Horseman Death and then just doing whatever it is that Apocalypse wants him to do. For Sabretooth, it's the lust of battle. Sabretooth would enjoy going around and killing people. And that's what makes him so dangerous as a potential horseman. With Warren Worthington as the Horseman Death, it was brainwashing. It was an unwilling thing. With Sabretooth, he would willfully turn himself over to Apocalypse and then just go around and just kill everybody that he can. And so it would literally just give Sabretooth free run of the Marvel Universe. Jumping back into this battle with Wolverine against the Hulk after becoming Horseman Death, it's a testing ground. It's basically this idea that Apocalypse sends him forward to see whether or not he's truly capable of facing off against some of the mightiest heroes that exist on Earth. Now notice this, of all the characters that Marvel could have picked, they picked the Incredible Hulk. Now half of this is because of the fact that Wolverine versus the Hulk is always something people will read. People will always read a story called Wolverine versus Hulk. But the other half of this is that the Incredible Hulk is one of the strongest, if not the absolute strongest character in the Marvel Universe. And so because of this, in the end, he's not necessarily able to defeat the Incredible Hulk per se. The Incredible Hulk actually gets the better of him. Now, initially, the Incredible Hulk defeats him and then is just kind of like, okay, I'm done. And the Incredible Hulk walks off after beating him unconscious. Now, of course, Apocalypse teleports Wolverine away and then basically says, okay, well, at least you survived. So I guess we can kind of go with that. Now, the other half of this is, remember, Apocalypse is not new to the Incredible Hulk. Apocalypse has subdued him in the past. Like, he's literally grabbed the Incredible Hulk and forced him into being one of his horsemen. The problem is you can't do the same gag twice. And so because of that, Marvel just kind of left that out in this particular bit of a story. But with regards to Wolverine getting his adamantium back, that's exactly what it seems like. It's literally just a series of hoses and, connections and so on that give the adamantium back to him. The problem with this is that Marvel ignores a couple of things that should not necessarily be able to exist. For example, it's established that when adamantium hardens, it cannot be liquefied again. Adamantium is kept in a very particular state in order to keep it liquid, but once it cools and it hardens, then it's like that forever. That's why Wolverine's adamantium being bonded to his skeleton was such a big deal. If all it took was extreme heat in order to get the adamantium out of him, then somebody somewhere would have had the genius idea to throw him into the sun and then just capture the adamantium, put it in a vial, and then take it back to Earth and bond it to somebody else. And so because of that, Marvel kind of ignores this. They kind of ignore this idea that adamantium cannot be liquefied again. Now, it's done for the sake of the story, and it works. I mean, it's, it serves its purpose. Wolverine gets his adamantium back, but this is what I was talking about when I said that the whole epic of Wolverine getting his adamantium returned to him kind of came to a screeching halt. This story came out at a time when Marvel was almost bankrupt, and so it was literally, how fast can you get his adamantium back? Who's gonna write the story, and when can we get it done? And then it was written, it was drawn, it was done, and it was out for sale, and that was it. It was done extremely fast. But what this does is it basically sets Wolverine going forward and facing off against the X-Men as the Horseman Death. And it's actually pretty cool. It's actually pretty interesting to see that happen because, again, it's this return to familiarity. It's return to him going back to the person that we know him being going forward into the 2000s. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.